Have you ever gotten on stage and completely forgotten what you were going to say? Well, if it's happened to you like it's happened to me, then you know exactly how embarrassing that can be. You remember it. I know I do. You get on stage in front of a crowd and you know you've prepared. You've planned out your speech. You're going to crush this talk. At least you think you are. But then you get behind the microphone, you open your mouth, and you go completely blank because you have no memory of what comes next. That usually happens because you've tried rote memorization, which means you've tried to write out your speech and commit that talk to memory word for word without any hacks or any helps. And that doesn't help. As a matter of fact, usually for most of us, that method doesn't work. And if it does, it's very time consuming, it's exhausting, and it's hit or miss at best. I don't want that to happen to you ever again. I want you to take the stage with your speech internalized, and I want you to deliver it with such confidence that everyone watching feels like you're speaking extemporaneously. I want you to deliver it with such confidence that everybody in the audience thinks this is coming off the dome. This is coming off the top of your head. And that's possible. You watch movies, you watch television, you watch YouTube. People do it all the time. They can stand up and, in the case of a comedian, they can deliver jokes for an hour. In the case of an actor, they can deliver lines for 2, sometimes 3 hours, the entire length of a movie. And yes, there are edits, and yes, they do reshoots. But the truth of the matter is, there are memory athletes that can remember ridiculous amounts of information. And those individuals are no more intelligent than we are. I'm going to give you just a few hacks to help with memory. These are the hacks I share with my students. These are the hacks that I share with my clients. These are the hacks that I use myself, and I believe they're going to work for you. Now, before we get into those, a little bit about memory. The human brain is really bad at remembering random bits of information. But that same brain, your brain, my brain, is really good at remembering images and stories. And then that makes sense. Long before humans were able to read and write, we had to know where predators were. We had to know how to find water. We had to know how to avoid danger. We had to survive. And we used our memories to do it. Not only did we have to survive, but we had to make sure that our legacies survived. And so we passed along our history by telling stories, stories that we remembered. And we survived remembering what we saw. We could remember where the good berries were, and we could remember the poisonous berries we had to stay away from. We could remember where our friends were, what our friends looked like, and we could remember the enemies so we could stay away. Our brains are not much different today than they were so very long ago, and we can use visualization and storytelling to our advantage if we want to remember just about anything. Here's how to do it. First off, before you start memorizing anything, you need to plan it out. Your talk needs a structure. As a matter of fact, the more chaotic your outline, the more unstructured your talk, well, the less of a chance you have of remembering what you're going to say. You can't remember what comes next if it's not crystal clear what comes next. So make sure that you have a solid outline, an outline that makes sense An outline that's simple, an outline you can commit to memory. Once you've planned everything out, then I need you to get the information out of your head and on to the paper. If you really want to remember, I would challenge you to not type it out, but to write it out. There's science out there that backs the idea that the act of writing, physical handwriting, actually goes much further and is much more effective in helping us to remember than speaking into a device or typing it out. There's something about the motion of the human hand and you having to be present and you having to commit and you having to write it out that helps to sear the information into your memory. And so not only do you want to plan out your outline, but you want to write out your outlines. As a matter of fact, if you have the time and the patience, you really want to write out the entire speech, not so you can commit the speech to memory, but you want to write it out so you can get it out. You want to give your mind the chance to work out the transitions, to smooth out the rough places, to work that speech out from beginning to end. You don't want your audience to hear the first draft of anything you have to say. After you've planned it out, after you write it out, now here comes the fun part. Now it's time to lock in so you can remember what you're going to say. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to use visualization and you're going to use storytelling. Here are some hacks that you can use to visualize what you need to remember. One of the most famous ones is called the Memory Palace. You've heard of this before. They've been using this method, speakers have, for thousands of years, literally thousands of years. Cicero, Greek philosopher and orator, was famous for using this method. And the method lived on long after he did. How does the Memory Palace work? Well, it uses visualization. I'm willing to bet that you know your surroundings like the back of your hand. If I asked you to describe any room in your house, chances are you could describe it in pretty specific detail and you would not be wrong. You are familiar with your surroundings. Of course you are. You live there. It's an image that's burned into your mind. If that's the case, then why not use that to your advantage? That's what the Memory Palace does. The Memory Palace connects the points of your outline, the bits of information you want to remember, with pieces, items of furniture around and in your location. For example, if I wanted to remember the outline of this talk, and I wanted to tell you that the first thing you needed to do was to plan, well then, as I walked through the front door of my house and up the stairs into the living room, I would literally see the word plan laying on the stairs like a rug. Plan would be going up the stairs. Then as I walked on the rug that had plan on it, well then I would look to my left and I would see the television in the living room. And across the television there would be someone writing. But they wouldn't just be writing on paper, no. The brain remembers ridiculous images, elaborate images. And so they would be writing and the word write would be in flames. And so I would walk on the rug, that said plan, I would turn to the television and someone would be writing the word right in flames. And then I would remember that there was something on the stove. And I would look and I would see the smoke coming from the stove because it's burning. And the smoke would form the word remember. Plan, write, remember. How could I forget that? I know where I live. And so long as I remember what's in my house, I can remember that we need to plan our outline, we need to write it out, and then we need to use these techniques to help us to remember. There's another way that you can remember your talk, that you remember what you want to say. Even if you're not using stuff around your house, you can create mental images at random so long as those images are memorable, so long as they are extraordinary, so long as they're even ridiculous. You can create mental images, and those images will help you to commit your words to memory. And so if I want to remember the word Abraham, well then I'm going to think of an old man with a hammer for a head. Or maybe an old man with a leg of, I don't know, with a ham on his head. If I remember that, then I would remember I was talking about Ham or hammer, Abraham. Of course that doesn't make any sense. Of course it's ridiculous. That's the point. Elaborate images help you to memorize. Familiar images help you to memorize. You want to connect the stuff you don't know with the stuff you already know. Not only are you going to use visualization, but you're also going to use storytelling to help you. And this is where acronyms and acrostics and mnemonics, this is where that comes in. If you had an outline and the outline spelled out the word ACE, first you want to achieve, then you want to commit, then you want to execute. Aspire, commit, execute. Let's change that A. Aspire, commit, execute. If that outline spelled out the word ACE, then all I'd really have to do was remember the acronym ACE. And I could remember that Snoopy was a flying ace, and he'd always chase the red bandit. I'm dating myself now. But the story about the flying ace would help me to remember that my talk was about aspiring and committing and execution. ACE. If you can align the main ideas of your message so that they tell a story, whether the acronym tells a story, or whether the first word of each point tells a story, or whether you can connect the 3 points together so that they tell a story, well then you increase your chances of memorization exponentially. There are memory athletes that use this technique all the time. They will assign a word to numbers. And so 1 will be apple, 2 will be pear, 3 will be cat, 4 will be dog. And instead of remembering the random numbers, well, they will tell themselves a story. The dog ate the apple, then ate the pear and chased the cat. And so long as they remembered what numbers those words represented, they remember the story. If they can remember the story, they can remember the sequence. Now you have to choose words that you're going to remember. It makes no sense to remember apple, pear, dog, and cat and not remember the numbers they're connected to. But if you can once again connect the familiar with the unfamiliar, that's another way you're able to visualize and storytell so you can help yourself remember. You can remember your phone number. You can remember this next one. The brain is not incapable of remembering bits of information. It just doesn't like to remember chaotic bits of information. That's why we plan our talks. And so along with visualization, like the memory palace and association, along with storytelling, the storytelling we use to link ideas together, the storytelling that acronyms and acrostics and mnemonic devices of all kinds affords us. Along with that, there's also something called chunking. We use that every day. You remember your phone number, but chances are you remember your phone number in 3 groups. 3 numbers, area code, 3 numbers, first 3 numbers, 4 numbers, the last 4 numbers. We all remember our phone number the same way. Your social security number, you remember that set of numbers in 3 groups. Why? Because we can remember organized bits of information, but it's really hard for us to remember random bits of information. And so if you are able to plan, if you're able to write it out, and if you're able to use some of these techniques to help you to remember, chances are you're going to be able to internalize that talk. Once you've internalized that talk, whether you've committed the outline to memory using a mnemonic device, whether it was an acronym, whether you've walked through the points of your speech using the memory palace, whether you've told yourself an unrelated story that's going to help you remember the sequence of your speech, whatever method you choose, the last bit of advice I have for you is put that method to the test. Don't wait till you get on stage to gamble and take a chance to see if you remember your talk or not. No, you don't want to give your audience the first draft of anything. And so before you get up to tell the story, rehearse. Say it out loud, even if you have to sub-vocalize it. Before you get up to tell your jokes, to deliver your set, I know you're going to crush it, but rehearse. Say it out loud, even if you have to sub-vocalize it. Before you get up to deliver your talk, practice, practice, practice. Yes, Allen Iverson, I'm telling you to practice. You got to practice over and over again so you make sure you get it right. You want to make sure that if there are words that don't fit, and you know they don't fit because you can't remember them, well, you want to make sure that you either change those words to words you can remember or highlight those words and pay special attention so that you can remember. You want to make sure that you hear yourself say the words so that you can remember what you have to say. Some of us are audible learners. Some of us are visual learners. Some of us are kinesthetic learners. Why not use as many methods as possible to commit your speech to memory? You don't have to rely on rote memorization. You can plan, you can write, you can remember, then you can recall. You can plan, you can write, you can remember, then you can recall. One more time, you can plan your speech, you can write it out. Then you can use these techniques to remember your speech, and then just to be certain you can recall it to yourself over and over again. Use these tips, and I can all but guarantee you that you will never forget your talk again. Take care.